Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to discuss almost all the topics of literary criticism and literary theory. I hope it will be helpful for you all, and I'm going to give you the easiest explanation. So let's start the video. So firstly, Preface to Lyrical Ballad 1802 by William Wordsworth. Preface to Lyrical Ballad is an essay written by William Wordsworth. Preface is a written introduction to a book that explains what it is and why it is. It also tells us about the thinking of the writer. Lyrical Ballad is a collection of 23 poems in which only 4 poems are written by Coleridge and all remaining by Wordsworth. So to avoid criticism, Wordsworth added preface in the second edition of Lyrical Ballad in 1802. The preface is often considered as manifesto of the Romantic movement in English literature. Wordsworth explains his intention in his poems. He expresses incidents from everyday life in everyday language and imbued with poetic sentiments. He defines poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and the poet as a man speaking to man. Because poetry speaks of universal human emotions, it should use diction that is natural rather than artificial and self-consciously literary. Thus Wordsworth set himself apart from classicist poets who addressed an elite audience in language that was tied to formal rules. Wordsworth argues that poetry and prose should be close in style and that the aim of poetry should be to imitate nature and inspire emotions in the reader in a way that emphasizes pleasure. In the final part of the essay, Wordsworth outlines the procedure whereby a poet may observe the world around them and compose poetry through deep reflection of their experiences. So, the preface to Lyrical Ballad 1802 by William Wordsworth was written to avoid the criticism. It was often considered as a manifesto of the Romantic period, and Wordsworth explained his intentions in his poems, and he used to write his poems not for everyone, not for the elite class, for everyone. So he used simple and rustic language. According to Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and the poet is a man speaking to man. So, according to him, poetry should imitate nature and inspire emotion. And also, according to him, a poet should write poetry on the experiences of his life and by understanding the world around him. So, the next essay is Traditional and Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was an American English poet, essayist, publisher, playwright, and editor and literary critic. He is best known as a leader of the modernist movement in poetry. The essay Traditional and Individual Talent 1919 was first published in The Egoist. The essay is divided into three parts: the concept of tradition, theory of impersonal poetry, and the conclusion. In the first part of the essay, he says that every poet should have the knowledge of tradition. The poet can get the experience of writing by reading the works of old poets. T.S. Eliot says that every poet must have tradition or historical sense. This historical sense is the coexistence of the past and the present. So, T.S. Eliot was an American English poet who wrote the essay Traditional and Individual Talent, which was published in The Egoist in 1919. So, he divided his essay into three parts: the concept of tradition, theory of impersonal poetry, and conclusion. In the first part, he says that the poet should have the knowledge of tradition. He should read the works of the previous writers, of the old poets, so that he gain the experience of writing from the old poet. And the poet should write poetry inspired by the old poets, and his writing should be the coexistence of past and present. In the second part of the essay, the poet describes the theory of impersonal poetry. According to him, if a poet writes poetry expressing his personal feelings and emotion, then he cannot be called a good poet. Eliot criticized Wordsworth and other romantic poets. In the third part, Eliot gives the conclusion. He says that admiring a poet with the poet's skill is the easiest thing. The poet must sacrifice his personal feelings and emotion. He must have to get the experience from the traditional poet, and the poetry should have relation between past and present. Thus, Eliot, in his essay Traditional and Individual Talent, has given the concept of tradition and the theory of impersonal poetry.
So in the second part, he describes the theory of impersonal poetry. He says that a poet should not express his inner feelings and emotion in a poem. He criticized Wordsworth and other romantic poets because they used to write poems expressing their feelings and emotions. In the third part, Eliot gives the conclusion where he says that admiring a poet with the poet's skill is the easiest thing, and the poet should sacrifice his inner feelings and emotion. He should not reflect his inner feelings and emotion in his poetry, and the poet should have the sense of traditional. His poetry should reflect the relation between past and present.
So the next essay is Modern Fiction by Virginia Woolf. So Virginia Woolf was a novelist, essayist, critic and publisher. She belongs to the school of stream of consciousness novelists. She is one of the great modern English novelists of the 20th century who has the courage to break free from the tradition and then to give a new direction, a new form to the modern novel. Virginia Woolf, in her essay Modern Fiction, criticized writers and literature of the previous generation. She advised writers to write what they feel and think, not what the society and publisher want them to. Virginia Woolf begins her essay by mentioning the traditional writers such as A.G. Wells, Ernest Bennett, and Galsworthy. According to her, the above-mentioned writers bring new ideas in their writings, but they still follow the Victorian technique. Woolf considers these three writers as materialistic writers because their writings are stuffed with unimportant things and their novel lack life, spirit, truth, and reality. She states that writers should write what inspires them. According to Virginia Woolf, the reality lies in the inner working of the human mind, not in the outer action. She mentions James Joyce and Joseph Conrad as, for her, these writers are spiritual because they use the technique of stream of consciousness. Thus, Virginia Woolf pleads the modern writers not to be narrow-minded and conventional, as there is no particular method of novel writing. The writer can express their feelings and thoughts in their writings. Virginia Woolf criticized many writers as, according to her, there is no particular way of novel writing. The writer should write whatever inspires them. They should not follow the Victorian technique. She criticized Arnold Bennell, Galsworthy, H.G. Wells because their novels are stuffed with unimportant things and their novel lack reality. According to her, the writer should not follow the old technique. They should invent their new technique and write according to them. And the writer should not be narrow-minded and conventional. They can express their feelings and thoughts in their writing. So I hope this video will be helpful for you. I will upload the second part covering the rest of the topics soon. Till then, do like, share and subscribe to my channel, and also I will provide the link in the description of the rest of the videos which I have already made. So yeah, do watch them. Thank you.